It's time to get unstuck again with the Dream Highway podcast. Hello and welcome back to the Dream Highway podcast. My name is Steve Pedersen, and today my very special guest is Joe Dubowski. Joe is a Christian, a husband and grandfather, and works as a licensed marriage and family therapist in the Chicagoland area. He is also an advanced grief recovery method specialist, helping people overcome the pain of loss. Joe's interest in helping people with loss began after the tragic death of his daughter, Gail, in the mass shooting that took her life on Valentine's Day in 2008 while she was attending class at Northern Illinois University. Since then, Joe has written the book, Cartwheels in the Rain, Finding Faith in the Wake of the Unthinkable, spoken on numerous talk shows, including Significant Insights with Jerry Rose, and a special episode of Dateline NBC, Columbine the Way Home. He enjoys conversing, as I'm sure you will find out in today's interview, and a good cup of coffee. Joe, welcome to the Dream Highway.
Hey, Steve, thank you very much for inviting me to be on. And I always enjoy talking to you. So
we always have a blast, don't we?
Yeah.
I wish we could kind of give people a little bit of an insider view of our conversations that we've had, even leading up to hitting record here.
Right.
We're a couple of goofballs. So I always love talking with you, Joe. Today's conversation is a conversation. Well, I've wanted to have a conversation with you for the longest time. You're a busy guy. I enjoy all of the conversations that I have here on the podcast. A lot of people have initiated with me to have a conversation, but this is one that I have always way before I ever launched the podcast. I was thinking, okay, who do I want to have as a guest? And you were like one of the first people always on my list. So I am just rejoicing that this day has come and that we get to have this conversation together today. So thanks again.
Thank you, Steve. I remember you talking to me about being on the podcast, toward the beginning of it. And it just so happened to be a time in my life where I had just so many things changing and growing. And it was like, I want to make sure I can give you my best. And so, I feel like.
And so today's the day for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a great lesson in that, Joe, because what's interesting, my wife and Carly and I, we just watched episode 4, 5, 6, and then 1, 2, 3 of the Star Wars movies.
Really? Okay.
And, all back to back. And it's amazing. Like those, we were talking about how, it took 30 years for all of those movies to come out, just about 30 years. And, we watched them all just back to back.
We are so spoiled by all this binging,
right?
That we're able
to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the thing that kept coming up was having patience, young Skywalker, or, patience, Anakin,
Mm-hmm.
So there's a great lesson in that, just being patient for when the timing seems right. So yeah, it's great to have this. Let's just talk about what you're doing right now. Like, what are you excited about or passionate about? What is the Dream Highway kind of looking like for you in life right now?
Right now, it's looking. I'm glad you brought up the word patience there, because that's what it really feels like to me right now. Is it's patiently staying in the lane that I'm in. You can be down. My wife and I can be driving to church on Sunday morning, and there was a time a few years ago when I was doing some driving for Uber. And so she noticed that my driving changed after driving for Uber. And she says, yeah, you seem like you change lanes more.
Interesting.
And so I'll be driving to church and she'll be counting how many times I've changed lanes.
Oh my gosh, she counts. That's hilarious. What's the biggest number?
don't I don't want to,
right?
It's embarrassing.
Yeah.
but no, it was like just being patient with the lane that I'm in. And right now the lane that I'm in is taking care of the clients that I see in my psychotherapy practice and in teaching grief recovery to people, and not chasing every squirrel that comes by. Because I don't know if a little ADHD or whatever, but I'm easily distracted by things. And so and there's and the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. And so for me, it's like just being patient, being content with and appreciating and being grateful for where I am and what I'm getting to do. And at the same time, allowing myself a little bit of peripheral vision to see what else might be coming down the pike that, God might be calling me to do other than that. So,
okay. All right. Yeah. And so it seems like there's a little bit of longing there as well. Like it's, and I think we all feel that on the dream highway, even if we're going after, we might have like, hey, this is my big dream. This is my big goal or something that I'm shooting for. But boy, it looks like, I don't know why I'm coming up with, the Lord of the Rings metaphors right now, but they set out, where was it, for Rivendell? They wanted to, essentially they need to get rid of this key or this
the ring,
ring, right? And so they're trying to go one way, but it's like, who's it? Saruman is like making, avalanches fall on the mountains, and they're like, we're going to have to go through the mines of Moria,
Yes.
And right?
That's a good metaphor for my life right there, in a way.
You're going through the mines of Moria. That's going to be the title of this episode: Going Through the Mines of Moria with Joe Dubowski.
I love it. I love it, man. Because that's where my life was. I was heading down this path, going up the mountains with my family towards what I thought was the dream highway turned out to be about to ready to fall off a cliff here. And finally, it's like having to go through the valley and going through some really dark, scary places. And I'm not talking about the pandemic. I'm talking about losing our daughter. And all the darkness and all the fear that goes with losing a child and losing a career, because my career changed at that time as well. And so there was just all this darkness, confusion, fear, heartbreak, and so on. And then finally we come out on the other side, and we're hurting big time. And we, the good grief, I could paint a whole fellowship of the ring kind of metaphor. Take that and
let's
just
go for it.
plot where we're going with this. And so coming to, if anybody's read The Lord of the Rings, you'll know what Steve and I are talking about, and just getting to the elven people and being welcomed by them. And that was being welcomed by our church family, our biological family, the dear friends who were there for us, and so on and so forth, and nursed us to health, and then sent us on our way, because the journey wasn't over.
In a way, it was just getting started, right?
And so in a way, learning about from friends, learning about this way of dealing with grief, the grief recovery method and everything, was kind of like me having this grief, and I just had to get rid of it. And so I had to go into Mordor, this really scary, terrible place. But I wasn't alone as I was doing it. And I had faithful companions and friends. And finally, I was able to let go of, that pain of loss and begin and then, kind of like, the phoenix, bringing, rising from the ashes and stuff like that. We were able to
little Harry Potter metaphor there.
Yeah, well, and
bring them all
mythology.
in.
We'll go for it. And so it was, and so risen from that to have, okay, what is the world like now, and just rebuilding a new life. And so, and so I know, you and I have had these conversations recent weeks since the tragedy, the shooting in Highland Park a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And I had expressed to you just how, that affected me, my wife, and everything. And in the past, there have been many times where, these events, other shootings have taken place in other parts of the country. And it's like, how do we help? What can we do? Because we feel like we've been through this and we have something to offer people, even if it's just a hug, and, companionship and an understanding of people who have been through something similar to what these people are going through.
Well, and it's interesting, if I could just interject real quick, is, I'm thinking this really is turning out to be a great metaphor, the whole Lord of the Rings, because, you think about Frodo and Sam, right? I mean, they were together through thick and thin, and that's what you had, you know what I'm saying? Like you had that companionship, your wife was there. But what's interesting too is that Frodo and Sam, though they could not see them, they had the fellowship. You know what I'm saying? Like Gandalf and all of these, Strider, Aragorn, all of these guys were with them. But they didn't know, right? They couldn't see these other people fighting for them, fighting the same battle on their side. So in a way, they were kind of surrounded, but it didn't feel like it, right? It just felt like, I want out of here. And then they come out of it, and what do they do? I think Frodo finishes Bilbo's book, A Hobbit's Tale, There and Back Again, right? Like, what else do you do but write a story about it, right? Write a book about it. And that's something that you did. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. And so, I wrote a book about it. And that's, part of what Cartwheels in the Rain, Finding Faith in the Wake of the Unthinkable is it was it's a memoir, a tribute to Gail, to our daughter. And it's also a memoir of basically the first year after the shooting at NIU.
Yeah.
And so it's just capturing while it was still happening.
Yeah.
How do we get through this?
Yeah.
And so there was, when I first started writing, about 6-7 months after Gail died, after the shooting took place, I had just finished getting, throwing the ring into Mount Doom and getting rid of it. I had just finished going through and completing the grief recovery method with respect to Gail and my relationship with her. And so then I was like, my mind was open and heart was open, and I had energy to put into writing. And part of what I was trying to accomplish at the time was the tribute to Gail. part of it was memoir. What was it like for me as a father who just lost a daughter in this terrible way? And there's a part of me that is the teacher part of me that is like, okay, this is how you do it. Okay. This is a manual for what do you do when something like this has happened in your life. And believing that there are things that can be helpful to everyone. And at the same time, some will be more helpful to some people than others. And nobody's circumstances, relationships, opportunities are the same, and respecting that, but still wanting to come up with the how to deal with this, because it's not something that you ever train for.
Sure. Yeah.
I never even saw an elective in high school or college on how to live when your best friend, your daughter or whoever, your wife or your parent or whoever's really dear to you has died. I never saw anything like that.
Yeah.
And the mass shooting situations. It's just like, the old Wendy's ad when they were trying to, get a leg up on McDonald's and stuff, said, supersize me. Being code word for just make everything double the size. Well, that's what this was like for us. It's like it's one thing to lose one's child in one of these shootings. It's another, to lose a child. It's one thing to lose a child.
Sure.
But when you add to it media attention, police, thousands of your closest friends wanting to be with you and to talk to you all, it's like supersize the whole thing. And that's the way it was for us.
Yeah. Wow.
And so and so what do I tell people, like, the new club members, if you will, to use a really bad metaphor, but it's very true, is, those of you who, because of what you've gone through recently in Highland Park, you're part of a club
that nobody wants to be a part of.
Nobody wants to be a part of, but you're there. And so my message directly to them would be, I'm here for you. You could, and so that's something Laurel and I, my wife and I, have tried to communicate in various ways over the years. To people in Newtown, Connecticut. We reached out, tried to find some mutual connections and so on there, and that didn't work out. Down in Parkland, we were able to connect with a couple people down there, and so on. But just man, we want to be there for you, but at the same time recognizing that when you and I talked, I think it was about a week after the shooting, in Highland Park, it was like there's just something keeping me from engaging, even though this is probably closer to home than anything that's happened in a long time. It's just not to drive to Highland Park and try to, it's like, who are you, Joe? It's like, I'm just one of thousands of people who are rushing to be there initially. And it's like, that's not my lane. That's not the lane that I'm in right now. That's such a, it's unfortunate that we are having this conversation in a sense, right? Part of me feels like, why should anybody have to have conversations like this, right? And I think, so what's interesting is you referenced our phone call, just to give everybody a little bit of a background.
I think most of our listeners know, if they don't already, that I have two daughters that are right now 16 and 18. And of course, one of the things that's always on my mind is their safety, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when I heard about this event in Highland Park, which is just a few miles from my home, I was in Minnesota with my family at the time when I heard about it, but I felt like I had such a strong reaction to it. And my feeling was, what can I do? Like, I feel like this is just outrageous that we should, quote unquote, have to live in a world where this kind of thing happens. I know it wasn't, I didn't know anybody involved, but I thought there's got to be something I can do. Like, what is it? What can I do? And that's why I reached out to you. And I thought, man, if anybody, would have some ideas on what to do, it would be Joe. And we had a conversation. And I think that conversation was really fascinating to me. It's certainly, like, I certainly didn't get the response that I thought. I feel like I got a much more enlightened response. Do you remember some of the things that you said?
Yeah, it was I don't.
No, I don't.
You're talking to an old guy. I'll play the senior card here.
There you go.
Say, I don't. But I do. I'll take a stab at it, and you tell me if I've got it right or wrong. Yeah. Here, but it's like, really. I mean, what can you do? Mm. There's a certain degree of separation that we have from the situation. Mm-hmm. And what I will tell you here, it just, from my experience of 14 and a half years ago, is that there were so many people who wanted to be of help or who wanted to take advantage of the situation to press some agenda, or who wanted to find out what happened and who can we point fingers at?
All right. Who dropped the ball here?
Yeah. And all these things and all these competing interests and everything.
Yeah.
And for the person who is actually at the epicenter of it, the person who is there and who witnessed firsthand what is going on, there's people, you have a need to process what you just went through and what you saw.
Yeah.
And if you don't, it haunts you even more. Okay. Mm-hmm. For the person who was secondhand, I would put myself in that category. I wasn't there, but I'm immediately affected by the situation because I lost one of the closest people in my life.
Yeah.
In the thing. And for me, the people who can be most helpful are the people who know me and know me well. Yeah. However, many of them are in as bad a place or as ill-prepared as I am for dealing with this. And so a lot of the things that one hears when a loss has occurred is not helpful. Things like, the advice that,
the unsolicited advice.
you still have a son. Yeah, I still have that's intellectually. Yeah, sure. That's right. I still have a son.
Yeah.
I'm falling apart because I lost my daughter.
Yeah.
Okay. So, the people who say, "Oh, I know how you feel."
How could that possibly be?
In talking to people over the last 13 years as a grief recovery method specialist, one of the top things that people get irritated about is the people who say to them, "I know how you feel." Not a clue.
Yeah.
And in fact, that can be even insulting to the person who's grieving. And so,
Hmm.
I probably, in my younger years when I was naive and everything, I probably said that same thing. So I'm not putting anybody down or thinking that I'm better than anybody else. I'm just saying that now I recognize is like, whatever you do, please don't tell somebody how they feel, because you don't. My wife didn't know how I felt, and I didn't know how she felt.
I thought you were going to say you didn't know how you felt.
And that's true too.
Yeah.
Because I was feeling a whole.
What is this?
Pour out the whole bucket of feelings on my desk.
Yeah.
And I didn't know I had that many. Before this happened, I knew sad, mad, hungry, and mad, and those were my emotions. And now it's suddenly, what do you even call what I'm feeling right now? Anyway.
No.
And so it's a matter of just recognizing how separated you are from the situation, and then how much can you really help?
Yeah. Well, and I can imagine that's an incredibly lonely feeling. It's not like you were referring to, it's not like all of your friends went through grief therapy counseling to, so they could be there for you. It's just a bunch of people who don't know. And so while you're processing all of this horrendous stuff, you're also having to just create space for other people's, I guess, good intentions, but just lack of being equipped, for even knowing what to do. And it just, it sounds like, and it just continues to add to the pain. And I think one of the things that you had referred to, because I came into the conversation, of course, there's the three big things that come up when something like this happens, of course. There was a local news channel that did a special report on this, and they touched, on the three things, which was gun control, red flag laws, and or I'm not even sure if they're laws, but just red flags, and mental health, right? And it was very enlightening. It was very interesting and informing. But when you think of what can we do to prevent this? I think that what was really interesting, what started coming up for me after we had our conversation, was I started reading and hearing different things about how, because of our fears, we want to control things, right? And I think that that's just a natural, like I don't want to live in a world where I'm afraid, so I'm going to change the circumstances so that I don't have to be afraid, right? And I guess when I came to you and I said, hey, Joe, what can we do? And your response kind of similar, like, well, yeah, there's not a whole lot you can do. And I was like, that's not the answer I want to hear. You know what I'm saying? It's like,
yeah, right.
We're living in a world that is messed up. And if it's not one thing, it's another, there's, and not that we just throw up our hands and say, okay, well, I guess there's nothing we can do. I was not, we're going to be a MASH squad, right? And we're just going to go around and clean up other people's mess. But I think there was something else too that you referred to, and it was more of a spiritual component, right? Because there's obviously, gun control and mental health and red flags and all of that stuff. That's one component, it's a very real component, but there's also another component that you referred to, which was the spiritual component. And I'm sure you probably don't have any thoughts on that, but if something
comes up,
if something comes up, feel free to share.
Yeah. Well, going back 14 years, I would get these phone calls from reporters, producers, so on and so forth. And I remember this one phone call I got from here, I'm picking up the phone, don't recognize the number. And on the other end of the line is a voice that's familiar, even though I've never met this person. And she's a reporter, has her own program, or contributes to as one of the contributing people on an NPR program.
Okay.
And I was listening to a lot of NPR back in the day.
Yeah.
And I do from time to time still. I mean, but I recognized, and she was like, so there was this like, you're talking to me? And it's like that kind of thing, right? Yeah. But she called, and she was one of the people who was calling and just kind of wondering, okay, what's the angle? Or, I don't remember exactly. And so I apologize, if I don't want to misrepresent what she was saying, but there were a lot of reporters who would call and say, kind of between the lines was like, are you going to sue the university for negligence? Are you going to, what are you going to do? Do you feel like they really handled things well? Where do you think? Looking for the story about the angry parent who's going to go after. And it's like, no. And I told her that, I appreciate all of the interest in, gun control and all these things, and, go after it. That's great. But I really think that there's a limit to how much good is going to be done by tackling one particular aspect of a much bigger issue. And to me, the bigger issue is the tendency in our society and in our culture to have said, if there is a God, it's like, God, thanks, we got this, we don't need you, and we got this covered, and so we're just going to live the way that we want to live, which if there's any clue to me in our society that this isn't working, it's these mass shootings. Steve, there are kids today who go to school every day wondering if this is going to be the day. For me, when I went to school and I wondered if this is going to be the day, it was me going to school and this being the day that I would put my foot in my mouth again. Right. And the class bully would meet me on the playground after. Right. Yeah. I mean, that was it.
Or like in your dreams, like I forget to wear my pants or something like that.
Please, I don't even want to go there. But anyway, not that I've ever had a dream like that. But it's like we have, don't talk to me about how our society has evolved when we've become a society that is gun obsessed, more anxious, more depressed, more polarized politically, racially, and so on, than anything I dreamed or imagined when I was growing up.
Yeah.
And yet, when I look back at history and compare where things were when people, I'm not saying everybody was Christian. I'm just saying that there was an awareness and a respect that there were absolutes. There were some absolute truths and some moral truths that we didn't have to try to discover on our own, but we're just kind of, nope, that's the given. This is what we're taught when, at home.
Yeah.
And this is what we see our parents practicing in their lives, imperfect as they are. And we learn from that and we grow from that. And now we've thrown all that out the window and we're teaching our children and we're teaching people, our young people, that you have to figure it all out for yourself. who you are, what you believe, what your purpose is. And that, I mean, if that isn't fueling the anxiety and all this other stuff.
Yeah. I wonder.
And I told the NPR person this.
Oh.
And she like, her tone, everything changed. It was like, yeah, I think you've got something like.
Yeah.
Something
unfortunately, it doesn't make for a great story.
No.
Right. But it's
I don't know if she ever reported on that, but
yeah.
But she opened up and shared with me about some losses and things that, she had experienced or her family had experienced. And so on. It was a connection. And I think that's what that's what we need in our society more of, is connection.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wonder, I wonder if this, one of the things that they talk about, the mental health issue, I wonder if that really, what that, is maybe just kind of an umbrella term for, spirituality, the whole kind of ball of the moral fiber kind of that you're talking about. Because I think one of the important things, it's interesting that you mentioned, like, I think a lot of, you think a lot of the reporters were going after this story of like sort of the vengeance kind of mode, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, hey, how can we sue? How can we get compensation? Blah, blah, blah. How did the whole concept of forgiveness come in for you with this whole situation?
Oh, forgiveness. Yeah. Oh, we don't hear a lot about that in the news, do we?
Yeah, no.
and I say that I have friends and, acquaintances in the news media, and I totally respect what they do and so on. And so there, people could look at Joe and see what I do. It's like, yeah, what about you? You do. They're like, yeah, okay. Yeah. Nobody's, we've all got, let's humble out here. Right. But in terms of forgiveness, that's that's a forgotten thing in our society. And it doesn't fit into the narrative of our society very well. Speaking of forgiveness and relationships, I specialize in marriage counseling, as well as, when I'm not helping people with grief and loss, I work with couples, including, where there's been some really nasty stuff, betrayals of different kinds and shapes and sizes and everything. And one of the hardest things with couples is this idea of forgiveness.
Yeah.
And
I'm interested, like with you specifically in the situation with Gail, and what was that like? I mean, I don't, gosh, this is a tough one, but like I've heard, like, my wife still teaches within the Jewish community, and I taught in that community as well for a while. And there's people that have talked about, what happened with the Holocaust and how difficult it is all these generations later to forgive, in that situation. What was that process like for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, it was humanizing the shooter, humanizing gunman, which is just the opposite of what, the popular culture tells you.
Right,
first of all, we don't even want his name to be ever said again.
Right. And that was one of the points, right? That was one of the points that this news special that they made was, we have to stop humanizing the perpetrator and start humanizing more the victims.
Right.
So that's
right. And I was just listening to an interview that David Cullen, who wrote a book on Columbine and another one, I believe, on Parkland, And he's gotten to be close and gotten to know these people. He's been studying. He's been entrenched in this whole mass shooting thing for years. And it's true that, and here's where my professional, work overlaps with this, is that there is a tendency with all of these mass shooters to look at this as a way of finding significance in their lives, because they have been so ostracized before they go off the rails on this. They, in their personal lives, have been so disenfranchised, ostracized, bullied, and some of it's in part because of their fascination with and their addiction to violent video games. That's where they've found their fulfillment. And the lines of reality and fantasy get to be blurred psychologically for these young males who perpetrators and everything.
Yeah.
And so they actually have been obsessing for oftentimes years about what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, and how they're going out in a blaze of glory is going to be better than the shooter at Virginia Tech or Columbine or whatever. And so this isn't something that they snap. Yeah. No, this is something premeditated, planned, and so on and so forth. How did they get there? How did these kids get there? How did the shooter at NIU get to the point where he became the shooter at NIU? Yeah. And so there's a tendency, yes, in the reporting of these things. On one hand, we can reduce the motivation that these for these shootings in the eyes of these kids by recognizing that when they report this, they're not going to mention my name. They're not going to be talking all about me and telling about my life and so on. So I'm really not going to get that benefit of it. So on one hand, let's not glorify them and aid in the fantasy that they have that this is how I'm going to be significant. Yeah. How I'm going to be remembered in life. This is not the best way. But at the same time, recognize that these people are significant. And they don't feel significant. And so for me, and this is, I'm going to have to wind, do a little time travel here, going back to 2008. It's like I can recognize that this young man whose name I heard for the very first time when a policeman called me while we were at the morgue in Rockford that night, saying, "Do you know this? Does this name ring a bell?" And the police were trying to find some connection. Why this classroom? Was there somebody that they were after? That kind of thing. And so just going back and recognizing that I could be bitter and hateful and angry, and I could let that anger, that resentment, that bitterness control me the rest of my life, or I can let it go and be free. It's not minimizing, not condoning or anything. That's not what forgiveness is. Forgiveness is letting go, acknowledging whatever that person has done to you that has hurt you in the way that it has, but then letting go of the anger so that you can be free. And so that's what I did. That's what my wife did.
And I would imagine And I would imagine that is a continual process, right? I can't imagine it's something like, like, hey, if, somebody does something stupid or whatever, cuts you off in traffic, you're like, whatever, they're probably having a bad day. You let it go. You never think about it again, right?
Yeah.
Whereas something like this, there was, I know, one of the first things that you mentioned in your interview or in your intro is that you're a Christian. And so you're familiar with the whole concept of forgiveness, right? And maybe that was helpful. I mean, obviously, we're talking about a hugely significant event, but yeah, I mean, I can't imagine, maybe it was, but I can't imagine like, oh, well, we just have to forgive, right? Like, I'm sure it was an incredibly tumultuous process.
You don't forgive if you don't hurt. If it doesn't cost you anything, if there's no pain, then what is there to forgive?
Right.
And that's why it's so important, and why so many people, when I'm working with grievers who have been hurt by somebody that they've lost, or they've been through a divorce and stuff like that, and they make excuses for the person and what they did and so on and so forth. And that takes away, that diminishes the forgiveness. And so I don't, in forgiving, the guy who killed my daughter, it's not a matter of, and just it hurts to say that somebody killed my daughter. And yet at the same time, it's like recognizing that, I've just decided that I'm not going to let this hurt me anymore.
Yeah.
And at the same time, what it's done is it's opened me up. I've done some reading about him and who he was as a person. I believe that I can understand a little bit about what it must have been, what it might have been like for him.
Yeah.
And I could, and so I do have, some compassion for him and what he had gone through in his life that led to that moment. And the difference between him at the age of, I think he was 22 or something like that, and me at age 22, which is how old I was when I became a Christian, is what God did for me. Gave me tools to deal with the pain and the feelings of insignificance and so on that I wrestled with so much when I was that same age.
Yeah.
Is that I got some tools that nobody had given him.
Yeah.
And those tools have enabled me to see and to know that my significance in life is not based upon anything that I've done. It's not based upon my popularity, on my paycheck, or any of these things. But I have significance in the eyes of God that goes beyond all of those things.
Yeah.
And I have learned how to grieve the losses that I've experienced in my life. And he had some really, really traumatic things happen to him in his life before the shooting.
Yeah, I can imagine.
That he didn't have. And so I can, it makes forgiveness
reachable,
less difficult for me.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. I really appreciate you sharing all of this. Have you ever considered, now this is going into a little Christian theology kind of thing. Have you ever considered post-resurrection? You know what I'm saying? Like after, we'll say the second coming kind of a thing. and everybody, appears before God, what might that be like for your whole, everybody around? Have you ever considered something like that?
Okay, you're asking a question. Yeah, I've considered that. Yeah. I'll stop right there because that's there's a whole bunch of different things that one could go down there.
And I'm like, what am I doing bringing this up right now? It's like we need to bring this plane in for a landing, and it's maybe that's our next episode.
Okay. What, have a part 2 with Joe?
Right.
But I will say that as one is going through times of trauma, such as what people go through, is one of the most important things that you can have is to come at it with an expectation that, as awful, heart-wrenching, I just don't have adjectives, I got to get out my thesaurus here for words to describe what maybe a listener are going through, or whatever. Have the expectation that somehow we are going to get through this.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow what we are going through and what we're learning from this whole process is going to be useful to someone else down the road. But the underlying expectation is, if you think you're going to make it through something, if you're going to succeed in something, whether it be forgiveness, whether it be becoming a stronger person, being able to think of your loved one with fond memories one day without them being painful, then you start looking for evidence that supports that. Meanwhile, if you are given things like we were told by somebody, said, you never get over the death of a child. Well, if we just took that at face value and said, and you start looking, well, if something comes that can help you to grow and feel happy again and so on, you just reject it because we've just heard from this person who we think, trust, and think they really care about us, and so they would only tell us that because it's true. Then your life is going to be miserable.
Yeah, man, Joe, that's like a mic drop right there that maybe we should end on, because that's, that has so much to do with our beliefs and, sort of that programming, like just being aware of, the things that we think and the things that we believe are things that have come into us from other people, whatever kind of media it might be. And that's how, and then we form our beliefs. And then, like you said, we look for ways to validate our beliefs. And so kind of bringing it back to the dream highway, then it's like, okay, I can't do anything about this tragedy that's happened. But what I can do is I can look for some signs of hope. I can look for some way out of here. I think that's what I hear you saying. Yeah.
It's like, where, what are the signs of hope? And driving home from DeKalb the day after the shooting, my mind was already going like, somehow we're going to get through this. I don't know how.
Yeah.
But I'm just assuming.
Yeah.
And that planted seeds of recovery and growth in my life.
Mm.
And so, looking for hope.
Yeah.
And recognizing even a little bit of hope, that is still hope.
Yeah. Yeah. Even a little bit of a ray. Well, Joe, let's do this. This is a hard discussion to bring to an end. I feel like
I could brighten your day, Steve.
Yeah, no. There's a whole bunch of different ways. I mean, I super appreciate having this conversation, because I know it's a difficult conversation, and people tend to kind of, I think, steer away from difficult conversations, and but I think your life and your example brings a lot of hope, to a lot of people, and a lot of perspective. And I so grateful that you joined me for this conversation, and I really hope that it's going to be a blessing for a lot of people and help people through some their own difficult times, whatever that might be, their own road to Mordor kind of a thing, So I guess with that, we'll wrap it up. Say thank you again, Joe, for joining us here on the Dream Highway podcast.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
Yeah, absolutely. Until next time, take care. So long for now.
All right. Bye.